picture of urban versus rural residents around the world, and you can see that more than half the population is now urban. Well, if we were zookeepers, we would hear about the situation of a particular prototypical habitat, and we'd say, how are we doing? And the answer to that question lies in how well the critters are thriving. So let's ask the same question with regard to the human species. Now that we have a typical habitat, how are we doing? I'm going to mostly draw on data from the US, although many of the trends I'll describe characterize much of the developing world and much of the developed world and increasingly much of the global south as well. And in some senses, the answer is quite good. For example, infant mortality has been falling dramatically over recent years. But in other ways, not so good. Here are some data that are close to what Dr. Reeves told us about 2 days ago. On the left, you'll see a map of obesity distribution in the US. On the right, diabetes. This is 1995, 98, 2001, 2004, 2007, and 2010. A fast-moving epidemic, about which we can say with certainty genetics are not the problem here. There is something else going on, either in the environmental or the behavioral realm. This is a graph of asthma prevalence in the United States, beginning in 1980, just under 4%. It's discontinuous because the measure that we use to measure asthma prevalence changed, but as we carry this through to the year 2010, you can see that we're up to about 8% now, a doubling in the course of one generation. This is a picture of automobile fatality rates in the United States by state. The good news is automobile fatalities are decreasing over time. In fact, it's counted as a public health triumph. But if you compare the high fatality urban areas with the low fatality urban areas, you'll see a disparity of about threefold, indicating that there remains a large number of preventable deaths from car crashes. Car crashes are the major cause of death for young people in the United States. This is a picture of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder from 1996 to 2012, doubling or tripling in prevalence. Some of this due to increased diagnosis, but some probably a true underlying increase in the condition. Anxiety and depression remain extraordinarily common in the United States, with about 2 in 11 adults reporting an anxiety disorder during the previous 12 months, and about 1 in 14 reporting an episode of major depression. Perhaps it's no surprise in view of these findings that the use of medications is rising in what can only be described as a promiscuous fashion. We're now at above the point where 10% of our population is taking 5 or more medications. And that's not the whole story. I haven't talked about autoimmune disorders. I haven't talked about reproductive disorders. So in many ways, we have evidence that we are not thriving as a species. Now, these are very multifactorial trends. There's no simple explanation. It relates in part to social conditions, in part to diet, in part to behavior. But if we were to try to design a habitat in which we could optimize the possibility of people thriving, what human needs would we want to address in that habitat? What would the design challenge be for architects, planners, landscape architects, and others? Well, here's my list. Your list may be a little different, but I would suppose that most of us would come up with a list fairly similar to what you see here. It's self-evident that people need clean air, clean water, regular physical activity, and the rest. So if we consider these human needs to be design challenges, what are the challenges in creating habitat that is healthy for people? We can meet these challenges in a number of ways. I've listed some here. Land use and transportation are 2 fundamental categories in the urban planning and design field. Ugo knows this better than I do. Green space, third spaces, and so on. I won't read you all of the bullet points. That's, by the way, I consider this an act of PowerPoint malpractice to put up a slide of bullet points and then to inflict on the audience the reading of those bullets when everybody in the audience can read. But let me work a couple of examples here to illustrate the ways in which urban design and planning can be pathways toward human thriving. Land use and transportation, let's consider together. This picture shows a typical pattern of urban development in North America and many other parts of the world over recent years. The vast expansion of urban areas over large geographic areas in a pattern known as urban sprawl. The conversion of traditional land uses at the edge of the city from forest and farmland to residential development. The low density use of land, so that instead of several families per acre, we see in the extreme cases, several acres per family. The low land use mix, meaning broad swaths of purely residential development without nearby access to commercial, retail, educational, recreational, and other facilities. Low connectivity, meaning that rather than traditional grids that made it easy to get from point A to point B in a relatively linear way, circuitous routes are required to get from point A to point B. All of those land use features, large distances, low land use mix, low connectivity, have implications for transportation. They require a transportation system heavily dependent on the automobile. We commit ungodly acts of civil engineering like the ones you see here, but even that is not enough to prevent the regular occurrence of traffic jams in most developed nations, cities, and towns on a twice-a-day basis, quaintly called rush hour, as if it lasted only 1 hour. It usually lasts 2 or 3 times that long. And it results in acts of social capital, of civic togetherness like the ones you see here. And coming down to the street scale, often an absence of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure precluding regular physical activity. And when that infrastructure is put in place, too often it seems an afterthought or it's poorly executed. We do have some solutions, variously called smart growth, traditional neighborhood development, transit-oriented development, new urbanism, terms that together refer to, in many ways, the opposite of the patterns I just described. Good land use mix, good connectivity, vibrant activity centers, higher density development. These are attractive human-scaled places, but that attractive and human-scaled quality is mixed with greater density, meaning that pedestrian and bicycle travel and transit are feasible, and those options typically exist in communities like these ones. The benefits for human health and well-being are listed here: routine physical activity, improved air quality, reduced car crashes, and enhanced social capital, and many others. Parks and green space are a second feature of urban development that can enhance human health and well-being, from the large scale of iconic parks such as Central Park in New York to the very small scale of pocket parks that can be placed in dense urban fabric, to community gardens, allotments, and pea patches where people can actually grow their own food. These assets have an amazing set of benefits for human health and well-being, from physical activity, improved air quality, and so on and so forth. You can read the list. Even some benefits that are relatively counterintuitive. We've now had about the 5th or 6th study in a row published showing that birth weight improves in green neighborhoods as compared to non-green neighborhoods, something that's mechanistically, in my view, very hard to explain, but it seems to be a repeated finding. So a lot of benefits to access to green space. Third places are the third example that I'll use. These are places that are neither home nor work, but other places where people can mix and mingle. We are a social species. We like each other's company. There's a reason that solitary confinement is a form of punishment in prisons. These can be indoor spaces like cafes, coffee houses, and so on. They can be outdoor spaces like the ones you see here: parks, promenades, sidewalks, plazas. There is even a company that has opened thousands and thousands of establishments around the world and has been very successful, not because people want to spend $5 on a cup of coffee, but because people like going to places where other people are, and because those places aren't typically built as part of city development these days. You can see the advertising for Starbucks on the bottom right, where the head of the company acknowledges that we are the third place. People love third places. This matters because social capital is extraordinarily good for health. This is a slide from Michiro Kawachi showing on the x-axis social mistrust, lower social capital as you move from left to right. On the y-axis, mortality. This is about as strong a relationship as we see in epidemiology. So building for the opportunity to get together with other people is building for health and well-being. Enhanced social capital, we know, leads to longer life expectancy, less morbidity, less violence, and so on. So I've worked a few examples here of how urban design strategies can be ways of creating healthy human habitat. And this will set the stage, I hope, for the rest of our discussion. The last thought I want to leave you with is this: that eco-health is uniquely situated to drill into this set of relationships. These are very complex relationships. The ways in which the human habitat, the urban setting, affects health and well-being are complicated. It has to do with social stratification, with the availability of food, with the ways in which people travel, with economic opportunity, and so on. This ability to handle complexity is characteristic of eco-health. So here we've got the built environment, which, as I've argued, is an important determinant of health and well-being. It also is an important determinant of environmental sustainability, and it is an important determinant of economic prosperity, all things that are important to successful societies. If we deconstruct the environmental side, there are a number of environmental features that are as tightly linked to urban design as are the human health and well-being outcomes. So this ability to deal with complexity, to carry out multi-level analyses, to analyze human outcomes alongside environmental outcomes is a strength of eco-health and perfectly positions the eco-health community to address urban health and well-being as a part of its remit. Thank you, Hugo. I'm looking forward to hearing our next speaker.